August 16, 1951. Pont-Saint-Esprit, a quiet, picturesque village in southern France. It started as a completely normal summer morning. The baker opened his shop. The farmers went to the fields. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. But by noon, the gates of hell had opened. Suddenly, the entire town lost its mind. A man jumped from a second-floor window, screaming, "I am an airplane," before crashing onto the cobblestones. He stood up with 2 broken legs and continued to run. An 11-year-old boy tried to strangle his own grandmother, claiming she was a demon. Others saw fire bursting from the walls. They saw dragons in the sky. Flowers turned into bleeding skulls. In just 24 hours, 5 people were dead, 50 were locked in asylums, and hundreds were suffering from terrifying hallucinations that would last for weeks. For decades, the government said it was cursed bread, accidental food poisoning. But 50 years later, a secret document emerged from the shadows of the CIA archives. Was this a tragic accident? Or was this small French town a testing ground for a top-secret mind control experiment known as Ultra? This is Retrograde, and today we are opening the files on the day the world went mad. To understand the horror, we must go back to the source. The chaos seemed to originate from the bakery of Roch Brand. The villagers had bought his baguettes as they did every day. But shortly after breakfast, the symptoms began. First, it was nausea and chills. He reported that patients were thrashing on their beds, screaming that red flowers were blooming from their bodies, or that their heads had turned into molten lead. The hospital was overwhelmed. There weren't enough straitjackets, so nurses had to tie patients to their beds with heavy ropes. But the hallucinations gave the victims superhuman strength. Many broke the ropes and ran into the streets, terrified of invisible monsters. One man, Gabriel Valadier, shouted, "My belly is being eaten by snakes." He tried to rip his own stomach open to get them out. Another woman threw herself against the walls to escape the tigers she believed were hunting her. It wasn't just a few people, it was mass hysteria. Over 300 people were affected simultaneously. The village of Pont-Saint-Esprit had become an open-air asylum. As the dust settled and the dead were buried, the authorities needed an explanation. The finger was pointed at the flour. The official investigation concluded that the bread had been contaminated with ergot. Ergot is a parasitic fungus that grows on rye. In the Middle Ages, poisoning from this fungus was known as St. Anthony's fire. It makes sense on paper. Ergot poisoning causes hallucinations and burning sensations in the limbs. The police arrested the baker and the miller. They claimed the flour was mixed with rye that had gone bad. The case seemed closed. But there were problems with this theory. Historically, ergotism causes gangrene fingers and toes turn black and fall off due to restricted blood flow. But in Pont-Saint-Esprit, very few people had gangrene. Their symptoms were almost entirely psychedelic. They were tripping. Furthermore, scientists argued that for ergot to cause such intense mass hallucinations, the contamination would have to be so high that the bread would have been inedible, black, and foul-smelling. But the villagers said the bread tasted normal. Something didn't add up. And for nearly 60 years, the victims lived with unanswered questions. Fast forward to 2009. An American investigative journalist named H.P. Albarelli Jr. was researching a completely different mystery, the death of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a biological warfare scientist for the U.S. Army who died in 1953 after falling from a hotel window in New York. While digging through CIA documents related to Olson's death, Albarelli found something strange. He discovered a transcribed conversation between a CIA agent and a representative from Sandoz Pharmaceutical, the company that first synthesized LSD. The document mentioned the Pont-Saint-Esprit incident, and then the smoking gun. The note explicitly stated, "The secret of Pont-Saint-Esprit is that it was not the bread at all. It was not ergot. It was diethylamide. Diethylamide is the D in LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide." Albarelli's theory was terrifying. He proposed that the CIA, in collaboration with the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division, had used Pont-Saint-Esprit as a field test. The goal? To see if they could incite mass panic and hysteria in a civilian population using a biological agent. If they could drive a French town insane, they could do it to a Soviet city during a war. This brings us to the dark reality of the Cold War. We know now that the CIA was running Project MKUltra, a program dedicated to mind control and behavioral modification. But there was also a lesser-known project, Naomi. Naomi focused on biological arsenals and delivery systems. According to the theory, on that fateful day in 1951, the CIA didn't just poison the bread. Some evidence suggests they might have attempted aerial spraying, dropping the hallucinogen from airplanes as an aerosol mist. But when the wind conditions proved unfavorable, they may have switched to a Plan B, contaminating the local food supply directly. The timeline fits perfectly. 1951 was the height of the Korean War. The U.S. was desperate for a psychological weapon. LSD was new, misunderstood, and incredibly potent. Albert Hofmann, the creator of LSD, supposedly admitted in private that the Pont-Saint-Esprit incident had all the characteristics of LSD poisoning, not ergot. But publicly silence was maintained. Of course, the U.S. government and the CIA have denied these allegations. Mainstream historians still lean towards the ergotism theory, or perhaps organic mercury poisoning from fungicides. They argue that LSD doesn't survive well in heat-baking bread, would theoretically destroy the chemical. However, if the drug was added after baking or sprayed onto the flour, the effects could have been preserved. The residents of Pont-Saint-Esprit are still waiting for an apology that never came. In 2010, the villagers demanded the opening of the archives, but the request was met with silence. Was it just bad fungus? Or were the people of Pont-Saint-Esprit unwitting lab rats in one of history's most unethical science experiments? The true cause of the madness remains redacted, but the scars are real. The memory of the day the dragons came, the day neighbors turned into monsters, and the day reality broke apart is burned into the history of France. Whether it was nature's poison or a man-made nightmare, Pont-Saint-Esprit serves as a reminder. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we hallucinate. They are the ones wearing suits, signing documents in secret rooms. Of course, the U.S. government and the CIA have denied these allegations. Mainstream historians still lean towards the ergotism theory, or perhaps organic mercury poisoning from fungicides. They argue that LSD doesn't survive well in heat-baking bread, would theoretically destroy the chemical. However, if the drug was added after baking or sprayed onto the flour, the effects could have been preserved. The residents of Pont-Saint-Esprit are still waiting for an apology that never came. In 2010, the villagers demanded the opening of the archives, but the request was met with silence. Was it just bad fungus? Or were the people of Pont-Saint-Esprit unwitting lab rats in one of history's most unethical science experiments? The true cause of the madness remains redacted, but the scars are real. The memory of the day the dragons came, the day neighbors turned into monsters, and the day reality broke apart is burned into the history of France. Whether it was nature's poison or a man-made nightmare, Pont-Saint-Esprit serves as a reminder. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we hallucinate. They are the ones wearing suits, signing documents in secret rooms. This is Retrograde. We analyze the past to understand the simulation. If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe and leave a like. Tell us in the comments, do you believe it was the bread or the CIA? End of transmission.